It's time to go beyond the headlines, cause I don't put in overtime just so I can headline. Okay, now it's Fox Sports, I'm live with Renee. Going hard every day, sports rapping every play. Different segments for your favorites, coming at you daily with positive vibes, yeah, we some game changers. Basketball, football, soccer, with different interviews, you never know who may pop up. Listen, only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines. Only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines. Only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines with Renee Washington.
Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines with Renee Washington. Joining me this week to get into all the excitement around the WNBA and women's sports in general. We've got Jasmine Baker joining the show. She's a PR consultant, journalist, motivational speaker, and overall a women's sports advocate. So it's perfect to have you on the show, Jasmine. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm happy to have you here, and I'm looking forward to getting into all that's going on. So exciting news broke out earlier last week that the WNBA and the WNBPA had reached a CBA, a new agreement, collective bargaining agreement, and in that included a lot of great changes for all of the women, including increased salaries, better pay and full pay, I should say, on maternity leave, better accommodations when they're traveling, so they're no longer sharing a hotel room, but they get their own hotel room. It increases everyone's salary tremendously and just provides them with a better quality of life. What were your initial thoughts once you saw the news break about the CBA?
I was in shock. Just the fact that we not only did we get a new commissioner within the same year that we were also getting this new CBA, but that she's been so progressive. But to see just that the players came through for themselves, that the league listened, that they were able to really get what they asked for, which is probably one of the more progressive CBAs we've ever seen in the league. And to see a league full of predominantly Black women getting it done in the largest running league, professional league, women's league in the country, this was monumental, and I couldn't have been more happy for these athletes.
Yeah, and one of the great things is, as you mentioned, with the new commissioner, with Kathy Engelbert, and the league being so in the forefront with all of this and being so proactive, we saw them as the news broke. They're out on Good Morning America. She was there with some of the players. We saw all the social media buzz. It has been a collective effort on all areas for the players and even people around the game to help make this possible. For you as someone and myself, I put myself in this category, we speak highly for women's sports and making change in women's sports. What do you take away from this for the future of the WNBA? And then we'll take it a step further for the future of women's sports in general.
You hit the nail on the head with the part B of that question, but to definitely look at just the league exclusively. Well, it gives you, first of all, it gives you the opportunity to not only, it allows us to bring it home and keep it home. Far too often, for people who are not familiar, a lot of players go overseas to truly make a living overseas. Top players in general, they make the majority of their money overseas after the season is up. So they're generally playing year round. So the fact that we've seen, top players were out last season because of injuries. So now we're able to keep injuries down, keep players home, allow them to be around their families. Like you said, quality of life. I mean, and even work-life balance to a certain extent. So we're able to have that. We're able to have ambassadors for the game here at home. Making money here at home during the off season. Obviously we've seen Candace Parker's been one of the more visual athletes who have stayed home, but it's still not enough. I mean, I would love to see more NBA opportunities, college opportunities for these players to stay home, but not just that, make a living while they're home. So I think it definitely sends a message in that regard that sports, basketball in general in this country needs to step up, especially when we're currently hearing about, the controversy with lack of female coaches in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have all-stars who are trying to figure out what they're going to do while they're here. And it's just mind-boggling. I understand not all of them can coach, but at the end of the day, let's make sure there are opportunities out there for these players, because, some of them, we saw Sydney Colson. I want to say it was Hewlett Packard. I know she was working for some tech company along with some other athletes. So there are other opportunities out there for these players during the off season, but I'm excited about that, and just the fact that we get to keep players home.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You talk about that work-life balance, and now having the ability for these wives, mothers, providers to be able to support their families and not really have to go out and find other jobs. And of course, you can always go out and make extra money. No one's saying that there's anything wrong with that, but it shouldn't be that you have to go out and, whether it's coaching or whatever, getting a job or playing overseas, you now have the option to potentially solely support your family on your WNBA salary. And that's something that a lot of sports struggle with, aside the NBA and NFL, honestly. And baseball, hockey, but aside from the major sports, and definitely in women's sports, you don't have that. Go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to point out, I totally agree. And I think it's interesting that, Kathy was going to have to win me over. Because in the past, I think what you've seen is these Fortune 500 executives coming over into the WNBA thinking that they can, apply some of these, some of these things to the league, and they haven't been aggressive. They haven't won us over. They definitely have not won the players over in terms of vote of confidence. I think this helps with that vote of confidence, but the fact that Kathy was able to come in, not for the simple fact that last season she was able to make changes during the playoffs in terms of getting the players better traveling accommodations in the playoffs, not even just that, which is very important, but to do that and then go from her focus has been, you can tell, trying to win these players over, because it's no secret that players do not have the best relationship with the league's office. And so I think her trying to rebuild that relationship, that rapport, and then you kind of see that with the CBA. I know obviously she wasn't the only one involved with that, but seeing that and her bringing in these big companies to make the investment in the players, because now there's a career development element to the teams now, where they'll be working with sponsors, affiliated leagues and teams to work during the off season and post playing, after they've done playing. That's another element that she's helped bring in. So to me, enough cannot be said about what the players have done with this, but the fact that she's made this type of a priority too, because I cannot stress enough, you have to be able to make the investment. And I think what the sponsors are doing is definitely going to be leaps and bounds for the players, and almost go back to your point, your point B, what that does for women's sports in general, because nothing is more empowering than what a woman can do off the field as well.
Yeah, and you know what? That's what Kathy was brought in to do, was to help make this change. And as I was looking through articles and stories and stuff like that, I came across an August article that was talking about how the players are ready to sit out if needed. They were ready to go to be whatever extreme necessary to make the CBA happen, because in the past we saw the CBA get denied and nothing changed. And for this past year, with the base salary at $75,000, the average compensation at $116,000, and then as players complained about, there really was nothing for moms. You remember seeing Skylar Diggins and different new moms dealing with trying to almost hide their pregnancy and keep it a secret so that they could make money and have to work around the rules, because there was nothing in place for that. So it also is like it was still such an old-fashioned mindset in terms of how the women were treated, and we see it across women's sports, where they don't consider the fact that, okay, you don't have to worry about maternity leave with any male sports. You don't, but you do for the women's sports. It's just, you have to,
Definitely.
just like in the workplace. So I guess my next
Yeah.
question to you is, I mean, where do you go from here? This is just the beginning, of course. This is not the solve all plan. You know, there's gonna have to be more that happens in the future. And I guess how, if you're Kathy, I'll put you in her shoes. You know, how do we expand from this and grow to continue to progress? And as you mentioned, bringing in sponsors and businesses to make this in, you know, the beginning of something great and not just the end of it all.
I think that's really what it comes down to, though. Making sure this isn't the end and looking at how do we continue to make this a viable situation, not just for players, but for sponsors as well. Because, you know, when people talk about the money and where the money comes from, and a lot of these other huge male pro leagues, a lot of it's TV money, a lot of it's sponsorship money that they're getting. Because some of these teams do lose money. For as many people as want to say this about the WNBA, a lot of your favorite male teams are losing money too. So this is the part of the business. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure that's a continuation. We want to make sure, I think, too, that it's more so like, you know, when you go back to the work-life balance, making sure you're staying on top of that. Because here's my thing. Far too often, you get in a situation where people are putting something out there because they're like, oh, okay, here's what the CBA says. So we're going to go ahead and put something out for, say, daycare. Well, if daycare is not adequate enough, or, for example, at the games and stuff like that, if certain things are not adequate enough, then it needs to be on the league to make sure that those things are adequate enough, not just that somebody put something there to say we did it. Right.
Yes,
So
it has to make sense.
yes, exactly. Because then you're going to be back at square one with players complaining yet again, as they should. So, and you know, as we know, moms do not play about their kids. So,
No.
they definitely don't want those problems. But then you have to look at, you know, what people haven't talked about. Now, obviously, usually you don't talk about fans during the CBA, but I think it needs to be considered. If you're Kathy, you need to be considering fans going forward too, because they're just as much a part of the game, and you know, especially when we talk about players, as anybody else. So that really needs to be considered, because when you hear about the complaints of the fans, it's just unacceptable, because it's the basics that fans are complaining about. And it's one of those things that if you want to continue to have go into, I guess, successful years in this league, you're going to have to face that and figure it out. Because you're, you know, I feel like with core fans, you're not going to lose core fans, but it's going to be really difficult to keep new fans, to bring in new fans, frankly. And, you know, it's a matter of that. And you know, people have complained because, you know, they also look at the type of muscle that the WNBA uses during the off season. Well, if it seems like you aren't investing in keeping people's interest during the off season, you know, that has to be something that needs to be considered too. How do we engage with fans during the off season? Because, you know, that can be difficult to do, almost to a certain point, bridging the NCAA gap.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You know, stuff like that needs to be considered. Making sure you have merch, you know, at least in your own market. Because I can tell you now, I'm based here in Dallas, Texas, and I can tell you right now, I can find, you know, I could probably find teams from outside the state at my local Walmart or Target, but I cannot find Dallas Wings gear except for a Dallas Wings game. So to me, yeah,
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I mean, but you know what? And so it begs the question, are they thinking about it? So, you know, it's things like that need to be considered. And, you know, people have been complaining. This is not anything new. People have been complaining about this. So it's things like that I think will definitely help Kathy, because I think she's definitely on track The CBA was something that was high on the priority list, obviously. So now I'm waiting to, I'm the type of person, I'm at the age now where I'm like, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yes.
Right? So, yes.
No, that's it. I mean, the financial side of it is just one huge part of it, don't get me wrong, but part of building up the league and part of building up any women's sports in general is you have to have the fans there. And you look at the success of leagues like the NBA, the NFL, what baseball and hockey are trying to do is to try to make sure they're connecting fans with players so that you see them as a husband, a chef, a swimmer, or whatever their hobbies are, whatever they like, whether it's Taco Tuesday, like you have ways you connect with players outside of the game. So now when you see them on the court, you feel like you know them. You feel like that's someone that you want to root for. That's someone you want to go out and spend money on to buy gear and tickets and whatever else. And you need to have that same connection with the women that they become a household name and someone that kids are looking up to, as well as, families wanting to go see and things like that. And part of your everyday conversation, we're talking about what's going on Twitter with whoever. Are we talking about that in the WNBA? Are we having those same conversations?
Right.
And this is something, as we talk about with all women's sports, the U.S. women's soccer team has been very openly protesting their pay as well. Other women's sports have to figure out, how do we make this happen to continue to increase salaries across all sports, but then also increase that connection with fans. So there's a lot more that has to happen. This is just a stepping stone, definitely in the right direction, but not the end all be all. So your thoughts on the growth for women's sports as a whole and how, we need to make this happen for our athletes. I know that's partly why I stopped playing soccer. There wasn't a future in it in terms of careers and salaries, things like that, being able to make a living. So your thoughts?
Well, I think you hit the nail yet again. Hit the nail on the head, girl. At the end of the day, yes, when you don't see a viable option, I mean, I tell my dad all the time, I probably would have changed my mind when it came to basketball if we were at this point when I was like in high school playing, right? Like my freshman year, I probably would have. Now, whether or not I would have made the league doesn't matter. But when you give a young woman a type of aspiration, a type of dream that she could possibly take care of herself or be the breadwinner of her own household, that means something in this country because, just the way women are socialized, that's important, right? So, and the beauty of it is 50% revenue, right? So, which is huge, and hence going back to the whole sponsorships and everything like that. These are the things that matter when it comes to women's sports. And so I think it's you're adding another element to sports, because here's my thing. Far too often people don't make the investment in women's sports, not realizing how much they're missing out on. I think a lot of people don't know how to market women's sports well. So they far too often, or they don't value women. Because let's be honest, there are people out there in high-ranking positions who just don't value women, so they don't make the investment in women, right? Or they expect, or they expect men alone to figure out how to market women, which can be difficult for them, right? So I think when you're able to put these different women in different positions during season, out of season, it goes a long way with visibility, because for me, I find that women's sports adds to sports, and I'll be so happy the day that certain outlets understand that, and not just pawn us off on our own, just giving us our own thing as opposed to just including us in sports in general. So, I'm excited though. I really am excited. The direction that we're going in, and the direction our country is going in, as far as women deserve more, women deserve better, not the basics when it comes to sports, is everything. And I'm so excited because, my friend, she coaches at a high school, and my best friend, she coaches at a high school, and Houston. And she just had her daughter, and she's just everything, right? And I'm excited for her because she's getting to grow up in a society where women are making that type of money. But her mom's like I said, her mom's a coach, so she's able to see not only her mom empower her, but also her father's a football coach. So, and her father is, he gets it, right? And then few men get it. So I think it's so empowering that they get to encourage your daughter, be like, look, you get to possibly play in the WNBA. And we as women can finally talk about the league the same way boys talk about the NBA and possibly going to the NBA sometime. That to me is so beautiful.
Yeah, and that's what all the players are talking about. This is them, they're doing this for the next generation, and that's something that's really special, to give young boys and girls a chance to look up to these women athletes as idols, to want to be like them, to look at them as role models, to want to one day be at that stage. That is what it's all about, inspiring the next generation to have something to believe in and something to enjoy and love to watch. So, Jasmine, thank you so much for joining the show. I really appreciate you coming on. I knew you'd come on and provide some great perspective on all that's been going on around the WNBA and women's sports in general. Where can our listeners follow you as you wear many hats? You're out here grinding and making things happen in many, many areas.
I'm trying to, sis. I'm out here trying to, make waves in women's sports as the league and as the women's sports evolves. I'm trying to do the same. You can follow me at We Got Game 2 on all social media. I just started writing for Swish Appeal. I'm excited about that. Shout out to Tamara for hooking, looking out for your girl. That was awesome. So I'm excited. But you can keep up with all women's sports on all social media with me. Thank you again for having me.
Congrats on that move. That's exciting. And no problem. Anytime. Thank you for joining us this week on Beyond the Headlines with Renee Washington to get into all things women's sports. I love it. It's been a pleasure having you on.